Hi, mythology students. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time doing a short lecture to break down all of the different steps and stages of the hero's journey. There are all kinds of different versions of this. Some of them have 12 steps, some of them have more. This is sort of a universal average hero's journey, mostly based upon some of the stages that are present in Joseph Campbell's work. So the word that gets used, that Joseph Campbell uses for the hero's journey, is monomyth. So mono meaning one or singular, right, like monotone. So this is kind of that one singular myth, that singular pattern, this archetypal pattern that's present in most, if not all, hero myths. So when we look at a story, we can kind of see this predictable pattern playing out. There sometimes are steps that are left out or steps that are added. Sometimes the hero might bounce around between different steps, not going through it in sort of this linear fashion. But the pattern remains, and kind of the ultimate theme remains as well. So as we go through the different steps and stages of the hero's journey, I'm going to use the example of the Wizard of Oz. And that will be in blue in that script font at the bottom of the page. So this is the handout that is also posted on Moodle on the same page that I really recommend downloading and saving, maybe even printing out if you're able to, because this is the lens that we're going to use to analyze the hero myths that we're going to read for the next couple of weeks. So you can see it starts up at the top where like 12 o'clock would be if it's for a clock face, with number 1, the ordinary world, and the big bold letters, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, kind of showing the big kind of overarching scale of separation, initiation, and then return. So we're going to go around the circle one at a time and kind of talk about what the major themes are for each step. And as we go through these, and I'm giving you the example of the Wizard of Oz, you'll be thinking about other stories that you've read, or other myths that you've read, or movies that you've seen that use this pattern. There are thousands. You can pretty much argue that almost anything is a hero's journey, but let's take a look first of all at the first step, the ordinary world. The hero is born typically into just this very ordinary world. Sometimes the hero is of royal birth, but more often the hero is just your common, average, everyday Joe. The hero's birth is sometimes a virgin birth, and a couple of the hero myths we'll read will see that. And typically the hero is born when the hero is most needed. So in the middle of winter, there's a reason we celebrate Christmas and Jesus' birth right in the middle of winter. There's this almost sense that that's the period of time that the world needs this quest or needs this hero. The hero often is not raised by his or her biological parents. The hero may be an orphan. The hero may be a foundling, don't even know who the parents are. It's possible that the parents were in danger and had to give up their child. If this is sounding a lot like Star Wars or anything, The Mandalorian, any of those, there's, a good reason for that, because they are very much based upon the hero's journey. In terms of the Wizard of Oz, we see Dorothy begins in this very ordinary world, and in fact the movie makes it even more ordinary by making it black and white. She's raised on a farm in Kansas, just your typical farm girl, and she's not raised by her parents. She's living with her aunt and uncle, and she doesn't fit into this ordinary world. The hero often feels like he doesn't quite fit into this normal kind of world. So that sets us up for the call to adventure, the time where the hero has come of age, is ready to go out onto this quest. Often there is a messenger, sometimes a person, sometimes an animal, that brings the message and brings the adventure to the hero. Sometimes the adventure just sort of happens. by a blunder or by coincidence, and suddenly the hero finds himself on an adventure. The call to the adventure is appealing to the hero's sense that his true identity is somewhere else. And just a note on gender, I'm going to be using male pronouns because the majority of our ancient myths are male heroes. There are many, many more female heroes being written right now, which is a good thing. But I am going to use the male pronoun just for simplicity's sake. The call is asking the hero to leave the old self behind and to venture out to find his true self. So there's a sense of separating, not just from family and not just from what's familiar, but from yourself. You know, if you're the hero and you're called out, you are leaving behind everything that defines you, because you recognize that your true self lies elsewhere. So for Dorothy, this is her dreaming of another world when she's standing there singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. This is Dorothy recognizing that she has her true self is elsewhere. She's searching for it beyond the farm. And the call to adventure is in a couple of different places in The Wizard of Oz. One is the conflict with Miss Gulch. She's the one that rides the bike around, and she's eventually the Wicked Witch in Oz. She's coming to get Toto. That conflict creates enough sort of mental stress for Dorothy that when the tornado hits, she's knocked out and she mentally goes somewhere else to Oz. And then the tornado itself is the call to adventure. Without it, Dorothy never would have been in the new world. Oftentimes, though, the hero will refuse the call. Sometimes it's just an outright refusal. Nope, not going to do it. I cannot possibly be the person who does this. Think about Neo in The Matrix. There's this sense that I'm not worthy. I can't possibly live up to this. No, thank you. Other times, though, the refusal may just be the hero delaying, not quite ready to go, not quite saying no, but kind of trying to figure it out. Sometimes the hero just sort of willingly goes, why, yes, I would love to go on this adventure. The step that the hero has to get over is this sense of safety, right? The ordinary world suddenly now seems really appealing, even though it felt uncomfortable before because I don't really feel like I fit in. Now it feels pretty safe. Maybe I should just stay here. But eventually, even if the hero isn't kind of forced out onto his journey, he will accept the journey and find his way into the quest. So for Dorothy, during the storm, she gets separated from her aunt and uncle, so she's not in this safe place. So she sort of is forced by the storm to go out on her adventure. She doesn't really have a chance to refuse it. Although she does resist when she first gets to Oz. She doesn't want to be known as the person that killed the witch when her house landed on her. She is a little appalled that the Munchkins are happy about that. So she resists a little bit when she first gets to Oz. The meeting of the mentor is an interesting phase of the hero's journey. Sometimes, most of the time, it happens in the ordinary world, in the known world. But sometimes the mentor doesn't come along until the hero is actually gone and into this new world, into the unknown. And yeah, I heard that. If you've seen Frozen 2, there's a song called that. This mentor is often a really helpful figure that maybe you wouldn't think is helpful. So there are sort of these archetype characters like the old crone or the little old man in the woods, the fairy godmother. So sometimes they appear weak, but in reality they are there to guide the hero. Other times they are much more substantial kind of characters, like a wizard, like Gandalf. So the mentor is an interesting character because there's a lot of variety where the hero meets the mentor and the type of mentor that it is. There's even the possibility that the mentor is divine, but that's not always true. So Dorothy meets her mentor when she gets to Oz. So she is in the new world, this new unknown world, when she meets Glinda, the Good Witch, who is her mentor, who kind of gets her set on her way. Once the hero is out and moving, there always comes this moment of crossing the threshold. There always comes this moment where the hero gets to his boundary. You know, if I go one step further, I'm going to be further away from home than I've ever been before. And so there's this threshold that the hero comes to that is very difficult. Sometimes there's a battle that has to be fought, right? Sometimes there's a threshold guardian. And so the hero is being tested on his determination and on his willingness to take this quest before he even gets out of his ordinary world. So it's that line between ordinary and extraordinary. It's the line between known and unknown. And that's an interesting kind of limit to think about. Even in our own lives, we're constantly pushing past these thresholds, and they're scary because in our mind, the things that live outside of what is known, the things that live beyond the boundaries, are monsters. It's dangerous. It's scary. I've never done it before. And so that pushing through the threshold is something that the hero character sometimes needs help with. But the hero has to move through it and into this new self and into this land of new possibility. So this is Dorothy landing in Oz, and then it's also her choice to follow the yellow brick road. So that's another threshold that she moves past. So once the hero is in this new world, this unknown, extraordinary, odd world that he's never been in, there is this series of different tests, different battles, and the hero comes upon different allies and enemies. So now that the hero is in this foreign world, sometimes this world doesn't behave the way that the hero expects. Think about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz with a scarecrow that talks, or a tin man that talks, and a cowardly lion, and trees that throw their apples at you, and monkeys that fly. So the unknown world, the new world, sometimes has its own rules, and the hero has to take a little while to get used to that. But as the hero moves through these sort of initial battles, or these initial contests or tension moments, it becomes pretty clear who's going to be an ally and who's going to be an enemy. Now, whoever is an ally and whoever is an enemy sometimes is very fluid. We sometimes see allies become enemies. We see enemies become allies. We see them kind of play back and forth. If you think about Lord of the Rings and the role of Gollum. Gollum is incredibly useful and in fact necessary for the quest of destroying the ring to be completed. However, it would be very hard to call him an ally to Frodo and Sam. So he plays back and forth across that boundary. So allies and enemies isn't necessarily a black and white kind of distinction. So our hero needs them though, because as the hero moves deeper and deeper into this new world, the allies around him help him focus his energy. He becomes much more clear about what his purpose is. He starts to understand a little better about where he's headed and what ultimately he has to do. Maybe that was kind of foggy before he left his ordinary world, but it's this process of these smaller battles and the gathering of allies and recognition of enemies that helps to bring all that into focus. So as Dorothy gains her allies, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, and she begins to recognize her enemies, initially the trees, the flying monkeys, the field of poppies that puts them to sleep, and then eventually, of course, the Wicked Witch. So then comes this very interesting phase that happens quite a bit, and sometimes heroes might bounce back and forth between 6 and 7 for a little while, but number 7, this sense of the approach, is almost like a moment of rest before the hero gets to the final big battle. So the boss monster, the big baddie, before he gets there, there's this reset button almost where the hero gets a chance to rest, to heal, to regroup, to gather his allies around him, and to prepare for this ultimate ordeal that's coming. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a peaceful time. There's always tension. There's always this sense of a ticking clock, like this is not the end and I have to keep going. If you think about in The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy and her companions actually make it to the Emerald City, there's this moment where they kind of get to rest and regroup, and they all end up in beauty salons. They're having their hair done, and the Tin Man is being polished, and right, so there's this very welcome, you just sit and relax, we serve you kind of feel before they go before the Great Oz and they learn what their true battle is going to be. And that's battling the Wicked Witch and bringing her broom back to the Great Oz. So that brings us to the very bottom of the circle. And this is the big battle, the central ordeal. I wish I had an echo effect on my microphone, because this is what the hero has gone out for. This is why the hero was chosen. This is why the hero's journey was given to him. This is why he was called. It is for this ultimate battle. In kind of the mythic knights in shining armor, this is facing the dragon. In terms of Lord of the Rings, this is getting to Mordor, trying to escape Sauron, getting into Mount Doom. Like this is what it's all about. That's the central ordeal. So notice it is at the direct opposite of the known world. So it is at the very bottom of the process. And that's because the central ordeal really and truly is symbolic of death. Everything the hero fears ultimately is about death. That's true of all of us. And so the battle itself is representative of death, and death of all kinds. Obviously a physical death, but there's also a psychological death, spiritual death, emotional death. The hero may cause or witness the death of one of his allies, or more than one. There is great loss. No matter if the hero ultimately wins, there is still a sense of loss over the course of this process. And oftentimes, the hero comes out of this battle deeply changed. So there's an emotional and psychological change that's going to come out of this kind of strife and this kind of trauma. But there's also typically a physical change. Luke Skywalker loses an arm. Frodo loses a finger. Sir Gawain, whenever he ventures out to see the Green Knight, he comes back with a scar on his neck. So there's something physical that the hero carries home. That is very frequently a part of the hero's journey. So the outcome, once we're on the other side of this enormous battle, we start to see the true nature of everyone, the true nature of the hero, who may have been very small and insignificant back at home, who is now revealed to be this amazing, courageous character. We might see true nature of enemies who are pretending to be allies, or even vice versa. So whenever we think about the central ordeal in The Wizard of Oz, this is when Dorothy is captured by the witch. She sees the hourglass turned and it's ticking down. But then the big ordeal happens. She is able to fight off the witch, and then kind of by accident grabs a bucket of water, dumps it on the witch, and the witch melts. So then once we're on the side of that ordeal, the hero is offered a reward. So if you think in terms of kind of the mythical, the medieval sort of knight in shining armor fighting the dragon in order to get treasure. So sometimes it's a very physical kind of reward. Oftentimes, though, it's a psychological or more emotional kind of reward. No matter what it is impossible to attain without first defeating the enemy in the ultimate ordeal. So whatever it is that is laying on the other side of that ordeal, the hero has to go through the ordeal first. And so as he emerges on the other side and he is acquiring this treasure, he's a new person. And sometimes he physically has changes. Perhaps he has a new name, or he comes back home with a new sword or an elixir to heal people or whatever. So there's this newness about coming through that process. It's almost like this rebirth as he then begins that upward swing of the hero's journey back towards home. So after Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz melts the Wicked Witch, the Wicked Witch's army immediately kneels to her and recognizes her as a leader. This is something Dorothy was not back on her farm in Kansas. And then once she is able to get back to the Great Oz and she gives the broom to him, she and her friends receive treasure. They receive rewards from the Great Oz. Then they discover he's just a man and all that good stuff. But they do get rewards. So then we've got another crossing, another threshold. So now the hero has to leave this new unknown world that has completely and utterly changed him and go back to this old world. And this is an odd threshold. It seems like sort of on the surface, like, no, this is easy. You just go back home. It's the easiest thing. But in reality, when the hero recognizes how much he has changed, returning home is not always comforting. There's a sense that the hero has that he might be misunderstood, that he can't possibly explain what he's gone through to the people back at home. There's this sense that perhaps he's even tempted to stay in the other world, the ordinary, unknown world. Dorothy is tempted to stay, when the Cowardly Lion starts crying and they're all very sad to see her go. There's certainly a temptation to stay there. An interesting thing happens with this, by the way, with astronauts, and especially those who stay on the International Space Station for a long amount of time. Coming back home, there's this syndrome. It's called astronaut syndrome or the overview syndrome. This sense that they have experienced something that only a very, very few have ever experienced. So going back home feels weird. And talking to your family or talking to your friends who actually have no clue what that experience was like can feel isolating, and it can feel quite lonely for those astronauts. That is very akin to what the hero feels in this threshold crossing. So getting back to the normal world is hard. In The Wizard of Oz, for Dorothy, it's when she gets onto the balloon with Oz and it doesn't work out. Toto runs away and she jumps off the balloon to go get him and the balloon floats away and she thinks she's stuck there forever. So then she has to try another way, and eventually Glinda, of course, gives her the no place like home little bit. So it's not easy for her to get out of Oz and back to the normal world. So then the last step in this sort of average kind of hero's journey is this sense of apotheosis and resurrection. So once the hero is back into the ordinary world, there is this sense that the hero is godlike. And that's what the word apotheosis technically means, to make divine or to make like a god. This character has moved in and out of unknown worlds. He has crossed and recrossed thresholds that other people have not. And so he has powers, he has status and importance that maybe other people in the ordinary world don't have. There's also the sense that he's been reborn. Remember, he's a new person now. After coming through the ordeal, after getting on the other side of what he was chosen for, he's different. And so his rebirth, his resurrection into this new kind of life sometimes is uncomfortable. He often brings back not just his own salvation or his own safety. Sometimes the hero coming back home actually rescues his entire society. That happens in Star Wars. It happens in Lord of the Rings. There's this sense that the hero is not fighting just for himself, but he's fighting for everyone. So in The Wizard of Oz, this is Dorothy waking up at home, recognizing in her family and friends the characters that she had met in Oz, and then sort of reaffirming her understanding of family and self. So that's the hero's journey. And so part of what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is reading all kinds of different examples of heroes' journeys and hero myths. And we're going to use this framework to analyze what that myth is saying. So you'll see some of them will have all of the steps. Some of the myths will have some of them, but not all of them. And so kind of figuring out each myth is going to be like putting together the puzzle. So I look forward to reading those with you, and I hope you have a good week.